Hi, this is week 2 of chapter 3. Now, last week we covered the second half of the chapter. Now, this week we're going to cover the first half. So, we're going to get into a little bit more of what sensory is rather than the testing of it. Okay. So, first half of the chapter, and it ends at around page 72. Oh, okay. So, first, we'll look at what factors influence how we feel about food, and then we'll look at exactly what the things are that we measure in sensory science. Okay, so the first set of factors to consider is physical factors, and I'll first talk about some genetic factors. So one genetic factor that you may or may not have covered in biology is the PTC gene. So PTC stands for, and I don't have it on my notes here. Okay. Oh, there it is. Yep. Phenylthiocarbamide. And this gene was discovered when a chemist was pouring powdered phenylthiocarbamide into a bottle, and his person who was standing next to him complained, "Oh man, that taste is bitter. I can taste it in my mouth when this powder was in the air." But the chemist who was pouring it, he tasted nothing, and he was like, that's strange. And so many things in science come from that, like one little phrase or thought. That's strange. And so they started investigating it. And what eventually was discovered is that the ability to taste this compound is encoded by a single gene in humans. And so you have a tasting allele and a non-tasting allele. And so in what I'm sure you did learn about in biology with Mendelian genetics, um, if you have the tasting allele, which would be denoted here by a capital T, let me turn on the laser pointer, with a capital T, and you have a non-tasting allele, which would be lowercase t, and here I have A and B, but you could say capital T and lowercase t here. And all of that then influences how you are as a taster for this compound. So some people, if they have two of the tasting alleles, when they taste this paper, it's considered very bitter to them. Okay. Now others may have one tasting allele and one non-tasting allele, and then if they try to taste that paper, it'll be a little bit bitter, but it's pretty tolerable. And then finally, if a person has two of the non-tasting alleles, so little t's, these people would not even taste this paper at all. Okay, so this would be like Fox, the chemist who was pouring the powder. He probably had two non-tasting alleles, and so he tasted nothing, whereas his colleague was a double capital T with two tasting alleles, and was complaining that it was really bitter. Now, this gene, what is the purpose of it? Because we don't actually eat phenylthiocarbamide, right? There has to be some reasoning for it. And the truth is, it doesn't just encode for that one specific compound. It kind of puts you in a category of generally tasting things more so than other people, but especially bitter flavors. Okay, so here I'll go over the term super tasters, which we would term those people that had two of the tasting alleles. But there are other genes that can make you a super taster. But this term first appeared in 1991, so really not that long ago in the big scheme of things, only about 30 years ago. in an article in a trade journal called Food Technology. And they were looking at a compound related to PTC, propylthiouracil, and they called those people who could taste that compound super tasters. Okay. Now, as they continued research, they found that these same people who could taste this compound related to PTC and found it extremely bitter also perceived salt more intensely. So it wasn't just the bitter compound. Okay. Since then, this term, super tasters, has been expanded to anyone who can detect a range of flavors more intensely. So now it's not necessarily related to one specific gene. There might be multiple genes involved, but if you taste a range of flavors more intensely than other people, they call you a super taster. Okay. Now, they've done the research and they have found that super tasters generally have more taste buds. So not only are they and like one of the reasons, I guess I should say, that these people perceive things more intensely might be that there are more taste buds sending more signals to the brain. Okay. So interestingly, and because they can perceive things more intensely, they can detect smaller differences between food products, smaller changes in ingredient levels. And so the super tasters are really good at detecting small changes. So as we're talking about sensory panelists, these super tasters can actually be really good trained panelists if we are recruiting for a trained panel. I didn't talk about this too much last time, but there are plenty of people who are useless in a trained panel. If you don't taste things well, you can't be on a trained panel. If you are too opinionated, you can't be on a trained panel. You have to be trainable and be able to taste things well physically. And so super tasters are actually great trained panelists when we're talking about that. Okay. Also, chefs and foodies are more likely to be super tasters. That makes sense, right? They taste small differences, and that's a really good skill to have when you're a chef. And it's a good reason to become a foodie if you can detect small differences. So interestingly, these people may be very picky also, right? And so generally, what happens with super tasters as children, they are extremely picky because the tastes are overwhelming, right? And then as adults, they start to appreciate some of those flavors, especially bitter flavors. Um, but really all flavors in general. And so they become more of a connoisseur of the flavors and are really good at picking out the small differences. But as young people, it's just overwhelming, and so they're often very picky. So other factors in addition to genetics that the book talks about would be hormones. Okay, and so the book talks a little bit about how females, your sense of taste can change based on where you are in your menstrual cycle. And so for girls in the first half of your menstrual cycle, you might prefer more lightly flavored foods because your sense of taste is stronger. And so more heavily flavored foods can be more overwhelming. But then in the second half, you prefer more stronger flavored foods, sweeter, saltier, etc. And that's just because your sense of taste changes with your hormone levels, and so when the hormones are high, you're tasting things much more strongly, and as the hormones drop, then you aren't tasting things as strongly, and so you might prefer something that is stronger flavored. Okay, now then this continues for females as you get older. Those estrogen and progesterone levels drop, and so that sense of smell and taste both decline. And so older women will prefer more strongly flavored foods, because they're not getting the flavor that they used to when they were younger. That those senses of taste and smell are diminished. Now, lest the guys think that they're safe, this can also happen in men. So as men age, testosterone level decreases, and so your sense of taste and smell will also decline. And so older men also experience the same thing, where they lose some of their sense of taste and smell as they get older. So it's very common in older people to require, from a sensory perspective, more heavily salted foods. And require is not a great word, but prefer. They prefer more heavily salted foods to get more flavor, because they're not getting the flavor that they used to get as younger adults. In addition to that, disorders can affect hormone levels, and then therefore your sense of taste and smell. So this is just one example here, is thyroid disorders. And so thyroid disorders can affect your hormone production and then affect taste and smell. So if you are experiencing a drastic change in your sense of taste and smell, it'd be good to see a doctor, because it may be a symptom of something else going on, potentially some type of disorder that is disrupting your hormone balance. Okay. Now we know COVID also has that, and we don't really know the mechanisms behind that, for that one. Okay. So other factors in addition to the physical would be psychological. So good or bad experiences can create a taste bias. So a food that you grew up with, right? As an adult, you may still prefer it, even though most people are like, ew, right? Or you have this idea even that as an adult you might like it. So for example, as a kid, I had Spam fairly often growing up, and then as an adult, I hadn't had it in years, but I was like, oh, I like Spam. I tried it. It's not so great now because my tastes have changed quite a bit. But you go into that with a perception. Another example on the bad side would be, as a kid, I drank a lot of grape Kool-Aid. My grandmother always had grape Kool-Aid at her house growing up. And then when I was about 10, there was an incident when I was at her house. I was drinking my grape Kool-Aid, and there was a spider in it, and it bit my tongue. And so I'm drinking this grape Kool-Aid. There's something crawling in my mouth. It bites my tongue. I spit it out. I still vividly remember me spitting it out and it crawling over my mashed potatoes. And I think I've maybe had grape Kool-Aid 3 times since then, because it has created a negative taste bias for me. I really do not like the flavor of grape Kool-Aid at all. And so our experiences can shape then how we feel about food. Okay. Loyalty to a brand or a term. So I think a great example of loyalty to a brand is Bluebell. Texans, Southerners are extremely loyal to Bluebell. And this is despite some pretty bad stuff that has happened with Bluebell. So I was not living in Texas at this time. 2015, I think I was in Iowa. Yeah, I hadn't moved away from Iowa yet. And so in 2015, like, I lived in Iowa. We couldn't get Bluebell there. We had to drive to Missouri if we wanted to get Bluebell, which was a hike. But we were, as an expat Texan, we were crazy about Bluebell. And so in 2015, there was a listeria outbreak that was from Bluebell products. So some of you might remember this. So Bluebell was told in February of that year that samples of 2 products from their lines had tested positive for listeria. Listeria is kind of a nasty pathogen. For most people, it doesn't really cause much ill effects. It's not that dangerous of a pathogen, but for pregnant women, it can cause miscarriages, and like a lot of pathogens, it can be a serious problem for older adults or people who are immunocompromised, but maybe young children too. Okay. Okay, so they were told that these 2 samples tested positive. They had their drivers, when they were going in and stocking shelves, remove these particular products from the shelves. But they didn't tell anyone. And they told their drivers, don't tell them why we're doing this. Say that there was a problem on the production line or something like that. And so they didn't tell anyone why they were removing the products from the shelves. They didn't issue a recall, and they didn't really fix the problem. Okay. And it turned out that it wasn't just one facility that had listeria that was getting into the ice cream. There were at least 2. So there was I think their main facility in Brenham and a facility in Oklahoma were both producing product that had listeria. And the reasoning or the reason why this was happening is they weren't really using hot water the way they were supposed to properly clean the equipment. They had other sanitation issues, including places where insanitary water was actually dripping onto the ice cream product during manufacturing. And so in the end, 10 people got sick and 3 people died from this outbreak. And finally, in April of that year, they closed all the plants and did a massive cleaning and updating facilities to finally fix the problem. Okay, but this was a big deal, and a lot of it was, I mean, there were cover-ups involved. There were just, I mean, flat out unsanitary conditions that caused this. The company pled guilty to 2 counts of distributing adulterated food products. They paid over $19 million in fines and forfeiture and settlements to people. This was the largest amount ever paid related to a food safety outbreak. The president of the company was also charged with some criminal charges for introducing adulterated foods into commerce, for wire fraud and conspiracy. He eventually took a plea deal where he pled guilty to introducing adulterated foods, and he paid like $100,000. And the other charges were dismissed for that plea deal. Okay, so this was a big deal, but yet, like, there now, I mean, even right after that, I remember people just celebrating that they saw the Bluebell trucks again. And so, like, this company had killed people with their negligence, but Texans that I knew and Southerners, they were just so loyal to Bluebell, like, it didn't matter. They were just happy when Bluebell came back. So that's a serious example of loyalty to a brand. Okay. And then, so other factors are cultural factors. So including region. I'm going to give you some fun regional examples. Okay, so here on the top left, we have lutefisk. So lutefisk is a Scandinavian dish. So it's like originally from Norway, Sweden, Finland. And in the US, where we have Scandinavian ancestors, so especially in Minnesota and Wisconsin, they still eat lutefisk. And so it is dried fish, usually cod, and it's cured in lye and aged. Okay. And then it's soaked in water before cooking, and it has a gelatinous texture. It sounds really lovely, right? It looks really lovely. But regionally, this is a thing that people eat. They have it at church potlucks, at holiday meals. And so coming from Texas, you're like, huh? And you don't understand it, but up there, it's a thing. And they have a taste for that. Okay, another example is scrapple, which is this top right here. So it is a mush uh, meal. It's of fried pork offal, which offal is organ meats, basically. So this is made out of like the head meat, heart, liver, etc., and trimmings. And they often refer to this type of product as everything but the oink. So it's basically all parts of the pig. And so it's combined with cornmeal and flour and spices. And so this is eaten around Pennsylvania. It's a Pennsylvania Dutch type item. Okay. In the South, pickled pig's feet. I've honestly never had them myself, but I've seen them. And it's maybe a little bit more south rather than Texas that you see this. But that's a thing, and other places they're just like, ew, grossed out, right? Limburger cheese. So Limburger is a cheese that originated in what is now the French-speaking part of Belgium. Look at Belgium on the map. The lower half of Belgium speaks French, and the upper half speak Dutch. Okay, and the lower half shares a border with France. So it's the southern part of Belgium. It's a soft cheese, and it smells like smelly socks. Yum, right? And it's because to make that cheese, they use the same bacteria that causes foot odor, right? So I was in a food microbiology class, and like we were given the opportunity for extra credit if we would eat Limburger cheese. It smelled awful. I did not need the extra credit, so I did not partake in that opportunity. But it looks fine, but it is a stinky cheese. Okay. Century eggs. So in China, these are more popular, right? So these eggs are made out of duck, chicken, or quail eggs. They're preserved in a mixture of clay, ash, salt, lime, and some rice hulls for a mixture of for several weeks or months. So they're not actually a century old. They just look like it. Can't tell you how they smell because I've never had one in front of me. I've just seen how they look. But those are a delicacy in China, as well as a lot of other things that we consider weird. And kind of more normal thing that we'd consider fried okra even. Okay, that is a very regional thing. When I lived in Iowa, they were like, "What is that?" And the texture to them was weird whenever I kind of forced people that I knew to try it. And so just living in places, we are exposed to food things that others aren't, and things are considered normal, and to us, where in other places things aren't. So that's something that you have to kind of be aware of, is that our regional location affects how we perceive the food that we eat. In addition to region, lifestyle, and environmental influences. So by that I mean, let's think about lifestyle, wealth, location also, but just what your family eats. So I fostered kids for a little bit several years back when my husband and I lived in Louisiana. We didn't have our own biological children yet. And we were in some ways kind of just like flabbergasted at the diets that the kids that would come into our house are used to. And in the same way, they were just like, huh, when they were eating the things that we had. And so the wealthier you are, the healthier the food tends to be, but that comes with a very different flavor profile. Um, and so that's something that has to be taken into account, is that different lifestyles have different food preferences, because you like what you're used to. And so a lower income family will have a very different food flavor preference than upper income, regardless of the price. Religion. Um, so just thinking about foods that certain religions don't eat is what you kind of most often think about. So for like Muslims, they will not eat pork. Some Jewish people also do not eat pork. There's rules about in the Jewish faith about eating meat and dairy at the same time. You keep them separate. And even within a religion, there are differences too. Um, there are some Jewish individuals who still follow those rules and keep kosher, and others who love a slice of bacon. Um, and um, and so that's something that affects how people perceive food also. And finally, holiday traditions. So in the US, we have Thanksgiving, and there is the typical Thanksgiving meal, right? You have the turkey, the dressing, the cranberry sauce, all that. Whereas in another country that does not have that, all of those things are quite novel and kind of strange. And so, in all, for the cultural, it's just good to be aware that it's what people are used to that kind of determines how they perceive food. And what you are used to may be totally different than what another huge segment of the population is used to. So let's talk about sensory characteristics of food now. We'll start with appearance. So appearance is pretty straightforward, right? It's what something looks like, but like what all goes into that, all right? So the shape of food, the size, the condition, the color, the exterior versus interior. So let's think about apples, right? So I have a little apple here and another apple here, right? So the size and shape of those may be different. Does one apple have bruising and another doesn't? The color, do I have this preference for Granny Smith, or do I hate Granny Smith? And so any green is a big turnoff for me, right? Um, then the exterior versus interior. So, do I have a preference for shiny apples versus dull? Because the dull looks more natural to me because it doesn't have added wax, right? Or, and on the interior, am I used to apples that are not bruised, that are perfect, and if I see a bruise, I'm just going to and throw it away, okay? Um, but this goes for many other things besides fruit, right? Just anything that you eat has all of these attributes that, and it's not just a preference thing, but like, for example, when I worked in industry, we would have a description of many of our products. This product should look this certain way. And in our description, we would have what the shape, size, condition, what defects in appearance were not allowed, what the color should look like, the smokiness color, etc. What it should look like when I cut into it. Should there be holes, visible holes in the ham, which is just air pockets, or should it be smooth, right? Generally with the ham, smooth, the answer is smooth, because air pockets mean you didn't do a good job compressing that when you were manufacturing it. But all of these things are taken into account, not just from a consumer preference standpoint, but from a quality control standpoint. The companies will be looking at all these things to make sure that they are maintaining the quality of the product and consistency when they're manufacturing it. Okay, so color, there's some key terms with color. The first one is hue. And so hue is the dominant wavelength of light that you see. So this is what we commonly think of as dominant like color. Okay, so these top set of squares here are kind of demonstrating hue, right? So this is a green hue, this is a yellow hue, this is an orange hue, red, purple, blue. Okay, those, so the color words are hue words. The next term is value. And value can simply be described as lightness or darkness. A high value is a high level of light. A low value is a low level of light, hence darkness. Okay, so this top row here is showing increasing value. We are going from a red to an almost white. It is so light, so increasing value. This bottom row is decreasing value, and so we're going to black. Okay, this middle row kind of shows the same thing as this bottom figure here, and it's more looking at chroma or intensity. It can often be used a little bit interchangeably with saturation. So a highly saturated color is a vivid color. Okay, so here we have a high chroma red, a very vivid red, and as we go to the right, it just becomes more gray. So notice the value is in between white and black, so it's not changing in value. The value is a middle of the road value here all the way through, but we're losing some of the intensity of the red, and so the gray kind of replaces it in that. Okay, so hue is the color, value is the lightness or darkness, and chroma is the intensity of the color. Now, color can be measured very objectively with computer machines. Okay, and so this is an example of me way back when I was in grad school. I might have been doing my postdoc, I don't know, using a colorimeter. So this is a Hunter LAB colorimeter, and we would actually, you'd put it up against the beef carcass or the steak and pull the trigger, and it measures the color in those terms of hue, value, and chroma. And it spits out numbers for you, and you could plug in those numbers into a computer and see exactly the color that the piece of equipment saw. Now, color influences perception. It influences how you initially feel before you even taste that product. So here on the left is, these are both pork ribs, okay, same cut. And the upper picture, those pork ribs are vacuum packaged. And the lower picture, they're out and are exposed to oxygen. And a lot of consumers are actually, they've gotten used to it in these bulk packages, but especially when this kind of stuff was first introduced, a lot of consumers were very biased against this, because which looks more appetizing to you, honestly, when you look at these two pictures, right? It's the more red one. And when we vacuum package things, it's a chemical reaction. The pigment in meat, there's a pigment in meat called myoglobin. That is what's responsible for meat being red. And it sounds a little bit like hemoglobin, right? And the way hemoglobin and myoglobin work is that they pick up oxygen and they transfer it. So in the blood, where hemoglobin is, um, the hemoglobin picks up oxygen and takes it to the muscle, and the muscle, the myoglobin in the muscle actually takes that oxygen from the hemoglobin and then uses it to fulfill the energy needs of the muscle, like the oxygen needs of the muscle. Um, so that is like, you know, the live animal application of that. But when there is no oxygen bound to the hemoglobin, when we have vacuumed out all of the oxygen and we have it in this package that has no oxygen in it, myoglobin has this kind of almost purpley color, okay? Versus when it is exposed to oxygen, it has a vivid red color, okay? And so consumers are used to this, or at least they were used to it. They've gotten more used to seeing this because this is how these cuts are sold most often now. But especially when this kind of packaging first came out, there was definitely some bias against it. Now, is there a difference in flavor? No. And in fact, as soon as you take this meat out of the package, it will start to look like this. And the reason that they package it like this is because oxygen helps bacteria that spoil meat grow. It causes other chemical changes in meat that are not great for flavor. And so this actually protects the flavor for a longer time versus having meat that is more exposed and does look red because it's exposed to oxygen. But so there's the bias that has been there. Pickles. People are used to seeing pickles with this like bright green yellow color. Well, in a lot of pickles, that color is fake. Okay, so in this example here, there is yellow five or six, I don't know, in there. They actually add color to pickles to make them look the way they do, so people will buy them, and people are just used to seeing yellow pickles, and so now if they don't see the yellow color, they think those pickles aren't as good, and so there's like economic science behind people buying yellow pickles and the need to put coloring agents in the pickles. Okay. This is the example that I came across recently. Like I'm on a Facebook page for people who shop at Aldi, and this person was like, do not buy the canned strawberry pie filling. It looks so gross. They look sickly. Fresh strawberries are better. Well, when you heat strawberries, especially in a canning process, the color is going to leach out. And it'll a lot of it just goes into the solution that it's in, all right, and out of the strawberries. But there's nothing wrong with the strawberries. The color has just come out of them because they've been cooked. But people are used to bright red strawberries, and so they would almost prefer to have extra preservatives and coloring agents added to seeing something that looks more natural. And it's just the way that people have been conditioned over time, I guess by the food industry, to view their products and not understanding how the processes of cooking and preserving and things work anymore. So that's it for appearance. Now looking at flavor. So flavor is a combination of taste and aroma. So you all should know the 5 basic tastes. The 4 definitely. The 5th one has only been more recently known about and taught. So you have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and then umami or savory can be described as kind of a meaty or brothy flavor. And so taste is actually, it's related to the shape of the molecule in the food and then how it binds to the taste buds on the tongue. So then flavor is a combination of those tastes, those 5 basic tastes, and aroma. And so aroma is it's odor, it's smell. Okay, so as you eat, there are volatile compounds in the food. And so by volatile, it means that those compounds, they evaporate or they become gaseous very quickly. And your nasal and your oral passages are connected. So if you look at this figure here, you have the oral passages here, and things going down the oral passages can actually come back up and hit the olfactory nerves and bulb here, okay, in your nasal cavity. And that's exactly what happens is, so they're connected at the back of the throat, and volatile substances will come around and hit this olfactory bulb and stimulate odor while you're eating, in addition to the in addition to the taste. So if you close your nose while you're eating, you'll notice that your sense of taste is greatly reduced. You will not be able to taste and distinguish, I should say sense of taste. Your sense of flavor is greatly reduced. You will not be able to identify flavors nearly as well as with your nose open. Same thing happens when you're sick. You can't taste things or can't distinguish flavors as well when you're sick. Things taste more bland because all you are tasting is these sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami tastes. And that's because those things aren't able to hit that olfactory bulb as well when things are stuffy in your sinus cavities. So texture then is the third area, and that's how a food product feels to, it could be your fingers, could be your tongue, it could be the teeth, like how it feels when you're chewing or crunching, and your palate, the top of your mouth. So some examples here, and this is not even close to all of the textures that you can identify. It's just a few examples. So chewiness, how well one part of a food slides past another without breaking. So you think about taffy, which is very chewy, versus pudding, which isn't chewy at all, right? Brittleness, how easily a food shatters or breaks apart. Okay, so think about crackers. Crackers are very brittle. As soon as you crunch down on them, they shatter. Versus brownies, right? Brownies would be more on the chewy side versus brittle. One thing I don't have on here is graininess. So let's kind of back up. Graininess, so the size of the food particles in a food product. So something that is smooth versus grainy. So let's say pudding would be smooth versus grits would be more grainy. Firmness, the resistance to pressure. So how easy is it to bite through a product? Consistency, thinness or thickness. So let's think about like chicken broth. It's very liquidy versus white gravy. Okay, it's much more thick in texture. Kind of backing up again, related to firmness would be toughness or tenderness. So it's related, but instead of just how much force to bite through, how much force to chew through something. Astringency. So this is one that I want to point out that I'm teaching you differently from the book. So astringency in the book, I believe they put it as a flavor, and it is not a flavor. So astringency is actually a physical puckering of the taste buds caused by a food product. And it leaves your mouth feeling dry and almost like coarse because you're feeling your taste buds. So some examples of things that cause astringency: tea, like hot tea. Like after you drink that, your mouth feels actually kind of dry, and it's because your taste buds have kind of puckered up. Coffee does it. Grape skins. So if you like take a grape, eat and just like peel off the skins and chew on those grape skins, that would be like the perfect example of astringency. It's not a flavor, it's actually like a feeling, where your mouth just feels dry while and after you're consuming it, because it has actually puckered up your taste buds. So big note from difference from the book there, astringency. All right, last slide here is continuing texture. So we can measure texture very objectively without a trained panel using instruments. So this figure or this picture here is a texture analyzer that, and it's actually just one machine that has a lot of different probes attached to it that can help measure different things. So depending on what you're looking at, you would use a different type of probe that kind of, in some cases, like the probe might mimic a tooth. It might mimic some kind of shearing force that you're trying to emulate. But you can measure so much with these. So here, they're lipstick. What is the force to puncture this lipstick with this size probe? They also have probes for lipstick where the lipstick is on its side and the probe comes down like this. And there's what is the force that is required to break that lipstick off? And that's important, right? Because like women don't want the lipstick to just break off while they're using it. And so there needs to be a minimum required force to do that is above what would happen when a woman is actually using that tube of lipstick, right? What is the force required to compress this other makeup or this cream? Or I think this actually might be Jello in here. And some of this you think isn't really like, why? What is the purpose of measuring the force to pierce a bar of soap? A lot of this is quality control. Is we have a product, people are used to it feeling and being a certain way, and we need to make sure that we are keeping it that way, because if all of a sudden it becomes like if this bar of soap becomes softer, those consumers are going to notice it. And so as a measure of quality control, they'll say, okay, out of every batch, I'm going to take one of these bars of soap and run this texture analyzer on it and make sure that we are producing a consistent product. Because the name of the game in a lot of food and obviously other product manufacturing is creating a consistent product. That is what consumers are used to. And when you have high variability, that's when you get lots of complaints because people don't know what to expect anymore. So more food examples here at the bottom is like, okay, so how much force does it take to break these cookies in half? I think they're cookies. How much force does it take to bend this? I don't know if it's a cookie or a salmon patty, but you know, bend this food object. In meat, and you'll probably see this when we visit Dr. Miller's lab this week. we actually measure shear force. And so we'll have a core sample of meat sitting on the texture analyzer, and there is a knife that has a V-shaped end to it. And so basically this knife goes down and shears through the core of meat, and we measure what force does it take to cut through that piece of meat. And it is correlated with how tender or tough that meat is. And so how that is used is we have some treatment on an animal, a change in diet, or age of the animal or breeds, and then we slaughter the animal, we cook the steaks, and then we take the cores out of the steaks and do the shear force, and we can determine from that, oh, well, this diet produced animals with meat that was much more tender than this other diet. And we can learn from that, and the research moves forward from there. So those are just some examples of, and there's so much more. Like there's things that this company makes where not only sometimes you're doing this, but sometimes you're doing this. So what force does it take to stretch a piece of spaghetti before it breaks? All right. As I slide this probe along these strands of hair, how smooth does it feel? Like there's so much with texture that can be measured. It's kind of crazy. So that is all I have for y'all this week, and so then we'll be having the exam at the end of this week for chapter 3, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.